Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the web class, How to Power Up Your Lead Gen Marketing with Podcasts. I'm Barbara Rosconi, and today we're going to talk about how to get you in a position to be going on the air. This podcast is brought to you by Insurance Web X, and I would invite you to follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram and Clubhouse. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's get started. This is our agenda for the day. We're going to talk about why podcasting, what's in it for you, why should you do it, a quick start guide if you want to have your very own podcast, and then how to be a PEG, which is a podcast expert guest. And along the way, we're going to talk about different tools, tactics, and techniques you can use to leverage podcasts as an excellent lead generation tool. So who is this for? Well, it's for someone who wants to be an expert. And I know expert is kind of a sensitive word. Some people would rather be called an enthusiast. They don't want to be called an expert. But let's face it, you are the expert that people are looking for, or at least you should be. If you wanted to get your car fixed, you wanted surgery, you wanted a home built, you would look for an expert. You wouldn't want to go to an enthusiast. So I want you to get in the mindset of being an expert who has something to say, something that can help people out at a higher level than they could do on their own. Now, the benefits of being on a podcast as an expert are going to give you reach that you could never get on your own. So what you're doing is you're associating with someone who already has an audience, someone that has people who trust them, who have credibility, and alongside them, you also gain credibility and trust, and also connections. So what it's doing is it's really allowing you to plug into an audience that's already there in a way you can't do anywhere else except in a podcast. Now, who is this not for? Well, it's for folks who are happy where they are, and that's perfectly fine. If you are happy being hidden, maybe you have all the business you need, you don't need any more, you're not interested in trying anything new, you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is too technical. And if that's you, stay tuned because it's not really that technical. Or maybe you just feel like, it's just, you're just not into audio at all. You don't listen to podcasts, you don't get it. If you're at least a little tiny bit inquisitive, you're a little curious, please stay with us. And for those of you who are wanting to get into the fast lane, get in the car with me and we are going to lead the race. This is an image from the Indy 500 I took a week ago yesterday. And this is the tower that shows you who's leading, how many laps there are. It gives you a really good indication of where people are in the race. You can also see the pit crew so that when a car comes in and needs to be changed and refreshed, my goodness, they can do it in seconds flat. It's really mind-blowing. So I want you to think about marketing as kind of like the Indy 500. Where are you in the race? Are you even in the top pack? Are you one of the leaders? Are you stopping in for with your pit crew and getting your engine realigned so that you can really run faster? And I think one of the things I love most about auto racing is the vehicle. And if you're looking for a really fast, snazzy vehicle that attracts attention, podcasts are the way to go. Now, if you're short on time, I am going to give you an offer at realpodcastpros.com. And you don't have to put an HTTP or www. You can just go to realpodcastpros.com. What it is, it's an hour consulting with me so that we can either get you at the starting line as a podcast host or as a PEG, a podcast expert guest. And I picked up this tip from podcasts where you announce the offer at the very beginning. And so this is where you can go to sign up for a time to meet with me. Now, who am I and why am I here? I know whenever I attend a web class, I wonder, how did that person get to be the presenter? And my podcast story goes all the way back to when I was 16 years old and I was asked to be the news director for my high school radio station, which was very exciting to go to the WDAN in Danville, Illinois, and be on the air. I was so excited. I wanted to major in broadcast communications, but my parents said, wait a minute, you should do a broader based business degree. So I did. And I met this really nice guy in college after hearing his voice on the radio. I thought, wow, I'd love to meet that guy. I met him, we got married, and his parents had told him the same thing. So we both wanted to be on the radio. And I have loved being on podcasts and being interviewed by the media. And I've always just been attracted to the idea of broadcasting and being on the air. So if you search for me and you look at Barbara Rasconi podcast, you'll see there are about 186,000 results. That doesn't mean that I've been on 186,000 podcasts, but it does show you that if you add the word podcast to your name, you do get some really great search results. This is a podcast I did with my sister. And if you're thinking, well, what should I do? You know, we did Rasconi Sisters. Actually, it turned to wisesistersecrets.com. This turned out to be a show that let us talk to family and friends. And one couple we talked to that was a family friend couple, we didn't realize that they were celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. And that interview we did was one of the last interviews or really conversations they ever had. So I would encourage you to think about podcasting and interviews, not just for business, but for family and friends as well, because there are a lot of great stories out there, and podcasting is a venue that you can use to capture them forever. So this is an example. This is a podcast interview I did in 2017 on Jay Baer's Convince and Convert. I'm showing you this because guess what? In April 2021, I was picked up as an influential podcaster based on this 4-year-old interview, and I didn't really have a podcast for them to talk about. Then this is another podcast that I did with Craig Newmark, and Barry Moltz is the show host. This was 10 years ago. I was talking about LinkedIn. So there's a lot of longevity with podcasts. Typically, I talk about podcasts, but I really decided to jump into the podcasting community. And I would like to invite you too to check out podfestglobal.online. Here you'll find a great group of podcasters. It's like a family. This year, I've been honored to speak at 2 of their conferences. The first one I spoke at actually set Guinness World Records, and I talked about branding and influence for podcasters. Little did I know that a few months later, I would be invited to present a masterclass on PR for podcasters. It's a quick 5-minute video that shows the power of podcasting and PR together. And I was very excited to do that. And it just really made me fall in love with podcasting as a genre, much the way I did when I fell in love with blogging 15 years ago in 2006, when I started my blog, wiredprworks.com. My new podcast is called Growing Social Now. I have about 5 podcast episodes that are ready to go. And the vision here is to really interview people that I've met along the way, some going back to the late 1990s and the social projects we worked on at that point, and talking to them about what's really working in social right now. So stay tuned for that. And it's going to be, I think, a great show. I love the interviews so far. It's not about me, it's about my guests. And I'm really happy to be able to bring this kind of information to people. So you might be asking, why podcasting? What's going on with podcasting? And I asked myself that question too. I thought maybe the space was too crowded. I mean, you can look and see, and thank you to Libsyn. These are screen caps from a presentation that was presented at PodFest Global. You can see that right now, well, when they presented the numbers, that was back in February, almost 2 million total podcasts and 46 million episodes, with an average of about 89,000 new shows launching per month, 89,000. So you might be thinking, why in the world would I wander in? Well, because the myth that the podcasting space is too crowded is just that, a myth. And so if we look at a 90-day activity by episodes, we can see that only almost 400,000 podcasts have 10 or more episodes. So it's not really 2 million podcasts. It's really only 400,000 that are active. And that's a much, much smaller universe. So when we really crunch the numbers, we can see about 89,000 new shows are released per month, with 11,500 new active shows per month, and 8 out of 9 new shows do not make it to episode 10. So if you can come up with 10 episodes, or make it 11 or 12, just to be on the safe side, you have already shot to the top of podcasting. And for a few more numbers, there are all kinds of numbers about podcasting. And this is the US Podcast 360 report for 2021 from MRC. And when we dive into this, we can see that in 2020, 75% of Americans were familiar with podcasting and 55% listened to podcasts. Now, I think COVID had something to do with us, and social audio in and of itself is really taking flight. Watch for more and more social audio platforms like Clubhouse to pop up. LinkedIn is working on their own. Instagram has one along with Facebook called Hotline. It's just really, really a hot type of content marketing. Audio is just fantastic. So as you can see, almost everyone in America is familiar with podcasting. Well, 25% are not, but I'm guessing that your clients and your prospects are. So what kinds of podcasts see big potential? This is what people listen to when they're listening to audio. And you can see yourself here. If I said, what all do you listen to? Do you listen to music, radio, podcasts, meditation and mindfulness, or audiobooks? Audio is really moving forward. In fact, audiobooks are starting to overtake print books. It's really something to watch and appreciate. And it's also something you need to think about diving into. Now, why do people listen to podcasts? And these are the reasons. And podcasts have different focuses. So you might listen to one about your area, your town you live in. You might listen to one about your interests. It could be if you're into sports or entertaining or cooking. There's all kinds of podcasts. There's a podcast for everything, parenting. So the reasons people listen to podcasts are, number one, they want to be entertained. And you might think, wow, is insurance entertaining or is financial services entertaining? It can be, depending on the person who's the guest. And they also want to learn more about a topic. They want to learn something new, and they want to stay informed. So these are the same types of goals that you would have in your content marketing. And we know that if you do a visual, the brain processes a picture 60,000 times faster than text. So when you're putting up a visual, you want to be entertaining. And that's what people are used to. They're really looking for a way to distract them from the boring side of life. Now, what are the top podcast genres? And here they are for you. You can see news and politics is number one. Then we've got comedy, entertainment, education, true crime, society and culture, and sports. Podcast hosts have a lot of power, and this report really was based around podcast advertising. And so advertising and sponsorship as a podcast host offers a great opportunity. 77% of podcast listeners agree that the host personality is important to me in deciding which podcasts to listen to. So if you have a great personality, people are going to want to tune in. 66% of Pocket listeners are more likely to listen to a podcast if it's recommended or promoted by a podcast they already enjoy. And 42% trust ads more when the podcast host recommends the product or service. And if you are going to have an ad in your podcast, you can recommend it at the very beginning. People will listen to the ad at the beginning, and they're happy to listen to it and then just settle in for the rest of the podcast. Now, a quick start strategy for your podcast is, first of all, you need a name. And when you think about a name, it doesn't have to be something that takes forever to come up with. It could be something that's quick and short. The shorter, the better. I would say 2 or 3 words. You can go longer if you want, but you really need to think about what would work on Twitter. That's only 15 characters. What would work on Instagram, and really think about how you can compress the name, something that's easy and catchy. Then your brand. What is your brand going to be? And when I talk about branding, I talk about PR, which is personality and reputation. So what are those personality facets that you would like to play up? And what kind of reputation do you want to have, and do you want your podcast to have? Is it going to be zesty? Is it going to be futuristic? Is it going to be traditional? Is it going to be reassuring? What kind of words would you associate for your brand? And then what kind of guests are you going to have? So for financial services, what you can do is you could think about how you are going to have your own news show for your community. That would be one really easy strategy to have and to launch. And you can be the anchor person for your community. So you can interview government officials, you can interview small businesses, you could go through your Chamber of Commerce directory and interview every business in there. So it's not really so much about what you do in this case, it's really about how you are the person who brings the news, and people will associate you as a leader. Then timing. What kind of time are you going to have for your podcast? It's really important to think about this. An episode in its raw format, or if you want to just do live and publish it immediately, which isn't the same. We're going to talk about how distribution in a minute. But if you just wanted to do a live show, then when you're done, you're done. But if you want to have it really polished and you really want to do a lot with promotion, it could take between 4 to 6 hours or more per episode. One thing I'd like to give you as a tip is if you want to have a day where you do interviews, maybe you do 4 or 6 a day, then you've got a month's worth right in one day a month. You can also record a whole bunch at once and then launch them. So if you wanted to do 2 days, or for 2 solid days, you do 20 interviews or whatever the number is, then you could even do quarterly that way. One thing to keep in mind is if you mention what's going on right in the moment, like when I opened this, I started talking about what the weather was like here in Charlotte, North Carolina today. That's going to be a lot different than if I was in Chicago and I was talking about weather in January. So keep in mind that references that you make could date your podcast. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just something to think about. And then plan. What kind of a plan are you going to have? And when we work with our clients, we talk about the wired PR plan. So we think about what keywords are we going to use? What are the intentions? So how do we really want to bring benefits? What are the routes we're going to use? And in this case, it's the podcast. And then the experience. How does this fit into your prospect and your customer experience? In this case, I would say it really fits into the awareness stage. So you want people to be aware of who you are. So it really helps with that front end. And then the D part is for design. And I like to design marketing in 4D, which is digital, direct, dynamic, and data. So digital is how you appear online. Direct is how you communicate directly. Dynamic is the fizz in your pop with storytelling. And then data, how are you going to measure this? So you really want to make sure that you have this plan mapped out. Now, another thing you need to think about is your shows. So are you going to just have random shows? Are you going to have episodes? When you think about Netflix, the shows have different seasons, or you could have a season, like you could have spring, summer, fall, or you could have a special focus. So you could have a season that would be developed to reach people who are interested in college planning, or a season on retirement, or a season on the best health now, those kinds of things. So really think about yourself as a show producer. And then with production, you can either learn how to do it yourself or you can outsource it. If you're someone who loves to play around with software and you love to really play around with files and you love to edit, then production is really great for you. But you can also look at places like high school and colleges where there are students who would love to help you and they'd be really affordable. You have to figure out what your time is really worth. To me, promotion is the real heart of this. If you don't have a promotion plan, don't even get started. You really need to think about how are you going to promote your podcast. You cannot count on your guests to promote their appearances for you. Guests have other things they want to do. And if they're popular, they're going to be on a lot of podcasts. But one thing you can do to help with promotion is to give them a really cool graphic that has their image, the show image, and maybe even a call out quote so that it's easy for them to share on social media. You want to make sure that it's sized up and ready to go for Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So you don't have to send them 3 different sizes, but send them one that looks good everywhere. And then ROI. Sit down and think about how much time is this going to take? If it's going to take you 5 days a month, and that's way too much, then think about being a guest instead. But if it's something that you can do and you really want to test it out, I mean, you could even just say, I'm going to do a month's worth of shows and see what happens. Then you've got something going and you don't have to keep it up forever and ever and ever. So I'm a fan of saying, okay, this is going to be my episode. This is going to be my series. And if it goes really well and you've got a great series, then you could do series 2, series 3, series 4. You can really keep building. And if it doesn't, you can say, well, I tried it. So I think it's worth giving a go if you really, really want to have your own show, but it's not really necessary. We're going to talk about being a guest in a minute. But whether you're a host or a guest, you're going to need really good gear. And the follow-up after this, I will send you a list of sheet that has a list of gear, which is good, better, and best for a microphone, webcam, backdrop, and also lighting. Now you might be thinking, oh, I know a microphone is really important, and it is, but why do I need a webcam and a backdrop? Because some podcast hosts, myself included, will want to do a video. And if you do a video, you want to have a really good webcam. You don't want to be using your in-computer webcam because it's not going to be great. You can use your iPhone if you want, or your Android, whichever one. I would test that out and make sure that it's got the image that you like. My problem with that is I like to have a dashboard, and it's hard for me to really see everything on a phone. You can also get, if you want to bump it up and go to the next level, you can use a DSLR or a mirrorless camera and plug it in to get a great image. But let's go back to the microphone. You have a few choices. If you get a webcam that has an integrated microphone, that's a start. You can also look at something like a Blue microphone, a Blue Yeti, and you can look at other microphones that you can buy online that are less expensive but still deliver great sound quality. I would recommend that you start small and build up. There's no need to jump in and spend thousands of dollars to have this fabulous state-of-the-art studio. It's not really necessary to get started. If that is something you do want to do and you say, I've got to have the very best, look into renting some space at a studio in your town. I know we have one here in Charlotte, and I've gone there to record, and it sounds phenomenal. So if that's where you're going and headed, then by all means, look for local resources before you decide to build the $20,000 studio. And then the backdrop. This is pretty easy. You just need a backdrop stand, and then you can add a backdrop. Or if you want, you can just have an image that you drop in if you're doing a Zoom call. The issue with that, and I know you've seen this, is when people turn their head, their hair is all over the place. It looks like they're cut out. So you can manage that by putting a green screen behind you, and then you can drop in an image. And there are a lot of other different things you can do if you want to get super creative. So for recording, so now we got your studio, we know what your show flow is going to look like, and you're wondering, well, how do I even record a podcast? Well, there are a variety of ways to do it. These aren't the only ones. Zoom is good because you've got your audio and your video. Some people say the sound quality is not that great. It's okay. You can also use Zencastr. People like that quality a little bit better. Then Squadcast is also good. And some people even use Skype. And there's dozens and dozens of different recording devices. I'm trying to keep this simple and just offer you a few. Now then, you've got it recorded. How do you host your podcast and how do you distribute it? Any one of these services will host your podcast and will send it out to the top services like Apple Podcasts. And one of them, Libsyn, is one that's been around for a really long time. They're the ones that provided the stats that we looked at before. And then we've got Buzzsprout, Captivate, Transistor, Castos, Podbean, Simplecast, and Resonate. So my tip here is for you to look at the different ones, see which one resonates with you, and then go with that. It could cost as little as free, or it could cost as much as $50, $60, $100 a month. It's really up to you and what your budget is for spending. I am always in the mindset that I'd like to invest a little bit more for better quality. So that's what I recommend you do, is just compare them and see which one you like the best. Now, editing. Actually, editing might have gone before hosting, but this is as good a spot as any. Editing, you can use a couple different ways to do it. You can do Audacity, and Audacity is free software. So if you want to upload your audio file, you can go in, you can make sure that both speakers are on the same level. Sometimes with audio quality, one person will be louder than the other, and that can be really jarring. Some people are just louder, so you want to make sure that you have equal audio quality. You can also erase any segments that you don't want aired, and you can clean up spaces, ahs, all those kinds of things. You can also have an introduction and an outroduction. And what that is like your lead-in music, getting people jazzed up. You talk about your podcast's mission, your vision, maybe a little bit of a call to action, but it gets people jazzed up. And it also lets them know that they're in the right place. So an introduction is really good. An outroduction is another call to action. Thanks for listening, more music. So it's kind of a buffer. It's a sandwich. You've got your beginning, you've got your end, and you've got your production in the middle. Both are very short. I'm guessing maybe 30 to 60 seconds. You can have these put together on Fiverr. There are a lot of people who do it, or you can do it yourself. And then ads. Ads can be anything you want them to be, which sounds kind of funny, but it can be if you have a sponsor. If you're doing a local show, you can have a sponsor that would buy an ad, or it can be an ad for you and your company. So if the goal is to have a download that people can go to your site, enter their email, and download something, whether it's a planning guide or it could be the top 10 tips to stay healthy in 2022, whatever it is, you want to give people a reason to go to your site and download something. So your show flow, how do you get an episode together? The first thing you want to do is invite your guests. And I sent an email asking, will you be my guest? That's the subject line. And then it's a really quick, short email that talks a little bit about the show. It mentions my connection with the guests and things I'd like them to talk about. So it's very simple. And then they can go to an interview site. They can go to a scheduling site where they set up the time. And when they do, they're asked to complete a form. And the form asks them to sign a release so that when anything they say is released, it also asks them for a headshot, a bio, a talking points they'd like to cover, anything they'd like to promote. And so it's really a good back sheet for what we can use for our interview. Now, I only send this out to people I really want to interview. I don't send it out to everyone. It would be a good idea to have apply to be a guest form on your website where people can go to Google Forms or whatever you want to use to take in these inquiries, where you can evaluate whether or not that person would be a good guest. There are a lot of people out there who want to be on podcasts, and that's wonderful, but maybe it's not a good fit for you. So you want to make sure that you qualify them as being a good fit and a good guest before you schedule the interview. After the interview takes place, it's recorded. And what happens with my guests is they show up about 5 minutes ahead of time. We greet each other. How you doing? I try and keep that part very quick and very short, because what I found is sometimes the pre-interview talk is better than the interview. It's like you're so excited to see each other that some of the best sound bites are spilled out before you even get on the air. So I try and just keep the cap on it as much as I can. And then with the interview, there's an introduction that I read. It's the bio that they send over. And I did have one guest, Marty Funky, who writes his intro based on the podcast, which I think is super smart. So when you read it, it's like, wow, he really wants to be here. And he's going to share ideas that appeal exactly to what my listeners are looking for. So I love that. After the interview is over, you want to make sure you thank your guest. You can send them an email. If you have a t-shirt, that would really be fun. You can send them a podcast t-shirt. And then the episode is edited or not, up to you. Then it's posted, and then it's promoted. So out of all these steps, again, promoted is really, really important. And promotion, as I mentioned before, remember, you want to have a speaker card. You can put that on your social channels and also ask your guests to put it on their social channels. One other tip I like from Marty is he mentions people during his podcast interview so that you can tag them later, and he tags them as well. So that gives you a broader reach, and it brings people into the show who weren't even on the air. So that's kind of a fun tip. Now, let's say, oh my gosh, that is just too much. And granted, it is a lot. And I honestly, when back in 2008, I think it was, Blog Talk Radio approached me at Blog World and said, we really think you'd be a good podcast host. Would you like to host a podcast? And I thought, no, I'll just do blogging. And it took me a long time to decide I want to do a podcast. And part of the reason was it's a lot of work, but so is blogging, and so is any social media. And if you really want to do good content, you have to make time for it. That's just one of the elements that goes along with the program. You can't do good marketing if you don't make time for it. But one thing you can do if you don't want to really set up the whole show and keep it going is you can be a podcast expert guest, which I'm calling PEG. Now, if you're a podcast expert guest, here's how you can do it. First, you can look at the top podcasts that your people are listening to. So let's say that you love working with people who have children. And let's say that they are in Kansas City. I know we have someone here. So maybe you want to look at being on a parenting podcast in Kansas City. So it's really important that you match the niche to your target audience by location, by interest, and an interest that aligns with what you do. So that's important. You're going to make a list of top podcasts. You can make a list of 50 to 100. And if you want to go national, that's fine too. It gives you more spread. But if you're only working in one state, maybe you don't want that. Although if you want the national credibility, it's fantastic for that. The next thing you want to do is listen to these podcasts. Maybe you do already, but if you don't, make sure you listen to them. And sometimes you can go to the podcast page and there's a transcription there. So that's kind of like reading the Cliff Notes. You can go there and see what the guests have to say and what the host has to say so that you can take some notes and you can assure them that you have listened to their podcasts. I know I get PR pitches all the time from people who say they love my blog. And I'll reply and say, what post did you really like? And I know they have to go look it up. They didn't really look at my blog. So you want to be honest and you do want to listen. And you might listen to it and say, geez, I don't really like this podcast, And if you don't, then it's not a good fit. Then the next thing you do is you want to connect contact them. And when you contact them, you want to send a quick email about who you are. The subject line can be potential guest, name of the show, and your topic. And when you write to them, you want to talk about how you like the show. You want to start off by complimenting them, mentioning something about the show. Then you want to mention a little bit about yourself and what you'd like to speak on. It should be a topic that's really interesting and different. And then you want to close by saying, I've given you a review. And hopefully you'll give them a 5-star review. That will get their attention. So hopefully they will say, yes, we'd love to have you be on our show. And they will schedule the interview, which could take a week. It could take months to post. So the key here is when you contact them, don't make it all about you, make it about them, a little bit about you, because it's very off-putting to read this email about how fantastic I am. You must have me. They can Google you. You could even say in a PS, you could say, if you're wondering more about me, or if you wonder if I'm legit, you can give them a link. And then the last part is promote, so you can also say, I promise to promote your show. Not I promise, but you can say, here's how I will promote your show, so that they know that once you are a guest, you are going to share it. So where can you find this top group of podcasts you want to be on? Well, of course, Apple Podcasts is one place to look. Google is another. You can put in the topic plus podcasts and you'll get lists and lists of podcasts. Spotify is another one. Spotify is really neck and neck with Apple right now. So that'd be a great place to look. And one of the best places to look is listennotes.com. And when you look at Listen Notes, they call themselves the best podcast search engine for good reason. You can type in the topic and you can look for listeners, for businesses, and for podcasters. So if you really want to get a feel for what's going on in podcasting, go to Listen Notes. And then as you start to build your list of podcasts you would like to be on, you can put them in an Excel spreadsheet or any other kind of spreadsheet you like. But you want to have the name of the show, the name of the host, the date you sent the pitch email, if they replied or not, the date of the interview, and then the date it aired, so that you've got a good look at what your progress has been like. Now, the podcast best guest benefits are, it's easier, it just is. Of course, you do have to do the outreach, that's for sure. But think about it. If you're on 50 different podcasts and they each have 5,000 listeners, so that would be, what is that? 5 times, that's 250,000 people you would reach that you wouldn't have if you just did email or ads. And also it's also great promotion. So it's easy, you've got reach and you've got great promotion. And keep in mind that you're going to have a call to action on each one of these podcasts so that people can go to your site and download something and join your email list. Now, what do you want to talk about? And this is really, really important. As a media professional, I like to talk about media training and how my clients are on point talking. And one of the first tips I'd like to give you is don't talk too much or too long. I know I've interviewed people and they get so excited. They go on for 5 or 10 minutes and I can almost sense a listener starting to nod off. So if you can think about upfront how you can have what I call popcorn answers, where it takes just enough time, as long as it takes to have a handful of popcorn, it doesn't take very long. But if you can come up with succinct sound bites, you're going to be a much more interesting interview. You also want to have a lot of variety in your voice. You might even want to take an acting lesson or two just to make sure that you can enunciate and just have some liveliness in your tone. So what can you talk about? You could talk about the problems you solve. And people might even not even know they have these problems. So you can come up with something they didn't know about. It's always fun to invent something that people didn't know they have, and it's important. So problems you solve is one. 3 ways you're different than your competition. So what makes you better, different, unusual? Maybe it's faster, better. Maybe you are really specialized, but you really need to think about how you are different. The next thing is 3 turning point or epiphany stories. So these, you can have a collection of epiphany stories. You can have 10, 20, but you want to make sure that you have 3 really, really good ones. So I like to think about these stories from the CPR method. That's what I use for storytelling. And that means challenge, process, result. So what challenge did people have when they come to you? What process did you help them use to solve the challenge? And what result were they looking for? You could either start with the result and work backwards, or you can say, wow, this is what happened. So that's really important because it brings what you do alive. And people love good stories. The last one is really fun, biggest mistakes to avoid. So maybe biggest mistakes to avoid when you're looking for a financial planner, biggest mistakes to avoid in buying life insurance. Really think about what can you do to help people. And you can also just think about what questions do people ask you all the time. And these, when you come up with what your dialogue or what your talking points are going to be, then this will help you when you craft your email outreach as well. So you could say, if you're looking for someone who can be on your show that has biggest mistakes to avoid, I'd be happy to share these ideas with your listeners. So that's what you want to do. And then your guest strategy, just to sum it up, you want to ID the specific podcast your ideal audience listens to. So there should be a direct match. You might even want to ask your clients, what podcast do you listen to? What do you like? And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of true crime and things like that. But if there is 1 or 2 that keep popping up, then those are ideal podcasts that you need to reach out to. Then you're going to create the target podcast guest list in an Excel file or whatever you want to use for spreadsheets so you can track your progress. And then you want to focus on specifics that add value and demonstrate your expertise. So when you're thinking about questions to be asked, think about what can I do that will really add value and demonstrate your expertise. Now, not every podcast host will ask you your questions exactly. I personally like more of a conversational podcast, but I've been on podcasts before where every guest answers the same 15 or 20 questions, which is okay. It's just kind of like, well, I know what they're going to ask me. And then I listen to the next one and they answered all the same questions, which everyone has different answers, but just keep in mind that there are going to be different ways that the host is going to want to structure the interview. You want to craft a media guide and you want to have easy email outreach. So your media guide, it's kind of like a press kit. It could be your headshot, your bio, who you are and what you do. If you have a website, well, I know you have a website, you should put your website on there, your social media, so that when the radio show host sees it, they're going to say, wow, I really want to talk to this person. And then you want to deliver high value and learn to sell without being salesy. So with this, you want to give people some really great ideas. You never want to sell anything, but you do want to offer to continue the conversation. And that's where the call to action comes in, when you give listeners a downloadable resource to collect those email addresses. So if you're going to be a podcast guest, keep this whole flow in mind before you even get started, and you'll have a great result, as will the listeners and the host. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting for me is mixing PR with podcasting. And from the 5-minute video I did about PR case studies, I'm just going to show you a couple results, but when I mixed PR with podcasting in my presentation, you can see that out of all of Google, I used the keyword PR Masterclass for podcasts. I came in number one out of over 209 million results. So that to me was very exciting. If you're looking for PR Masterclass podcasts, I'm number one. Now this is Podcast Masterclass. This is from Google News, and I came in one out of 4,840,000 results. So this is a way to pop right to the top of Google. And this is another way you can promote your podcast appearances, whether it's your shows or someone else's. And that's one way you could get some attention from the podcast host, is to say, I will be doing a press release about our appearance, about our conversation. What keywords would you like me to use? And when you mention them, you both get great PR. And this is a very, very valuable benefit. And just to recap our benefits, we talked about how podcasts give you much more reach than you could get really anywhere else. I mean, it's really hard to think about any other place where you could get to so many ears and so many people so quickly by interviews. And keep in mind, you're not going to do just one, whether you have your own show or you go out as a PEG, you are going to have a series of interview opportunities that expose you to people that you can use over and over. You're going to be associating with people who have an audience, who already have a community, who bring you in to be an expert. So it automatically positions you as a person that people are looking for. And it gives you just genuine credibility. Automatically, you are seen as a person who is a credible person, someone they can trust, and you've got a bunch of new connections, and you've got that downloadable resource. So you've grown your email list. It's great for lead gen, and it builds your relationship over time. So podcasting to me is a great way for you to not only grow your lead generation, but to really position yourself as an expert, to grow your community, to attract attention, and to build your business. And if I could help you with that, I would love to. If you go to realpodcastpros.com, just type in realpodcastpros.com, you can sign up to have a conversation with me. And in 1 hour, what we'll do is we will map out your strategy, whether you want to be a podcast guest or a podcast host. We'll go ahead and we'll do a high-level strategy, and you will be all set to take off. And just like in the Indy 500, you'll be in the big race and a really fast marketing vehicle that'll attract a lot of attention and get you to the finish line faster and better with sales, so that you can help more people have better, healthier financial lives. I'm Barbara Rosconi. This has been How to Power Up Lead Gen with Podcasting, sponsored by Insurance WebEx. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.